Hello, love. It's me, Anjali, and welcome to the Personally Yours podcast. I can't believe we're doing this again. I know I should count on myself more, but I'm always surprised whenever I'm able to stick to a commitment, to a project. And like I said before, and time again, this project just feels really, really good. So thank you for sticking along with me. Today, I wanted to talk about deaf and deaf communication because it is Deaf Awareness Week, May 1st to May 7th. And if you don't know this, I am actually deaf in both my ears. I actually made a whole YouTube video talking about it, which I will link wherever I can. But in that video, I mostly talk about how my mom came to realize I was deaf, what it was like going to school and getting resources, my experience with hearing aids, and how I'm able to sing, and just a lot of things about me is in that video. And so if you want to check that video out, I will make sure that is linked. But I really just wanted to talk about communication today because a lot of the questions that I get whenever I bring up my deafness is about my ability to communicate, my ability to speak really, really well. And I think, a lot of those questions I'm sure stem from curiosity, but I feel like they also stem from people not understanding the complexities of deafness. I guess we're just going to jump right into this, but the first thing to understand is, what does it even mean to be deaf? A lot of people ask me if I have absolutely no ability to hear. Do I hear nothing at all? And the truth is, most deaf people actually have the ability to hear like a little bit. I'm not saying it's enough for it to be of note, but they do have a little bit of hearing ability. It's much like with blind people. Most blind people don't just see like eternal darkness. They, have the ability to see something. It's not enough for them to be able to use that body part, reliably. And that's the same thing with me. I do have the ability to hear to some degree. I just don't have it in a very profound way. I was trying to find online just some sort of technical number, but it seems like 70% hearing loss is what people online say is considered deaf. In my personal experience, I have noted that whether you call yourself deaf or hard of hearing is really personal preference. I have noticed that people that are call themselves hard of hearing tend to associate more with the hearing world, and people that are deaf tend to associate more in the deaf world. And I am a unique case in that I do consider myself deaf, even if I kind of live in the middle, much like a biracial child. I have the ability to go through the hearing world, but I very much so don't have the tools that are needed per se to function there very well. I belong more so in the deaf world. I just didn't have the resources, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But I just wanted to make sure that was covered first and foremost, because when we think about deafness, we think of just nothing, just air, just hearing air. But that's not really what deafness is. You can still kind of hear, I like to say, the shape of sound. You can hear the shape of sound. You just can't hear the punchiness to it. All the lines, all the dots, all of the details of it. So another thing that I get asked when talking about my deafness is about ASL. And a lot of people ask, why don't I use ASL? And I will say straight up, it's because I don't know. And like I said, we will talk about why I don't know in a moment. But a lot of people like to say, then why don't you just learn it? And it's because it's like saying, why don't you just go learn Japanese? It's not as simple as that. ASL is its own language. It has its own culture. It has its own syntax. It has its own grammar structure. It has its own everything. It is a fully developed language. Okay, it's there are so many different, there's like there's British SL, there's Japanese sign language, there's German sign language. Every country has its own sign language, just like every country has its own verbal language. And then on top of that, you have different dialects per se, versus the regions or the cultures. So there's like Black American Sign Language, for instance. And so when you think of it as its own actual language, because a lot of people like to think of it as like a tool, ASL is a tool. And I understand that, and I think that it's great that more people want to learn ASL. I think it's also just very important that we remember that it is a language. It's not just a tool. It is a literal language, and it's not something you can just like pick up on the highway. Like it's not as simple as that. And that's also why it's super important that you learn ASL or whatever sign language you choose to focus on. It's important that you learn it from actual deaf people, because they are more likely to understand all of the complexities. Just like, like I said, if you want to learn Spanish, it's probably better if you learn Spanish from a native Spanish speaker than it is if you learn from somebody who has Spanish as a second language. It's not to say that Spanish as a second language teacher is not going to be able to teach you well, but if you can get it directly from the source, it's going to be way better. It's just going to be better. So I don't know ASL, and I think that it's important that we as a society don't expect every deaf person to know ASL, because ASL at one point, and probably kind of still is considered today, a privilege to learn. It was not something, I'm a child of the 90s, and I'm sure it was even worse before the 90s, but as a child of the 90s specifically, ASL was not something that was just widely given as an option. If they could mainstream you, which means put you in a school with everybody else and just kind of tell you to figure it out, that's what they were doing. And that's what they thought was best. And if you didn't know any better, because mind you, we didn't have the internet resources like forums and mommy books and whatnot. We didn't have all of those tools that we have nowadays. So if you didn't know any better, you thought you were doing the best you could for your child. And my parents thought they were doing the best thing for me by being like, you'll figure it out. They didn't see it really as a priority, number one, but I'm thinking more importantly, they just didn't have time to teach me, because there was 5 of us, and my grandma pretty much had to babysit us all the time, because my parents were either working or my mom was going to school, or at one point my mom even had cancer. So there was just not time for them to sit down with me specifically and teach me how to talk in that way. It just, and when nobody else is telling you that that's the important thing to do, it just doesn't become a priority. And so I think that we as a society need to understand that being deaf isn't a monolith. It doesn't all look the same. And so our abilities to communicate aren't the same. I know how to sign my name. I know how to say thank you. And I probably know little bits and pieces if I had to pull them out. But I don't know sign. And the expectation for me to know sign is just, do you know sign? I mean, maybe you do, but I don't know sign. And that's okay. I would love to learn it one day, but I also would love to learn it honestly with my community. Because I want to be a part of my community. I want to create friendship and relationships within that universe, because that's where I belong. Those are my people. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility that I would learn ASL, but I want to learn it from my people. I don't want to learn it from some person who just got a diploma one day, personally. And I'm not knocking a diploma, but, I want to learn it from my people. And so another question I do get asked involving ASL is ASL hard? Yes, because it's a language. It is just as hard. If you are not somebody that picks up languages easy, then you might not pick up ASL easy. I guess it's a relative thing. But like I said, it's a language, and there's a culture behind it. There's a history behind it. The reason why, for instance, the reason why Black ASL exists is because at one point ASL was going on, and they did not want to teach it to Black deaf children. So what did they do? They created their own language. And I think that's so cool, but like that's part of the reason why Black ASL, I mean, everything goes down to racism, but that's part of the reason why Black ASL exists. And to try to learn Black ASL and not know that bit of history as to where it came from, I feel like makes Black ASL lose a little bit of its color. A lot of language, I feel like the important part of understanding the language and why certain words or signs exist is to know the cultures, to know the history. And so like I said, it's just important to know ASL and all sign languages are just that. They are languages. They're not just things you just pick up one day or like a tool. It is literally a language in and of itself with its own culture and its own history. So, but I do get asked then on top of that, so you don't sign, how on earth do you speak so well for somebody who can't hear? And a lot of that probably just has to do with the fact that, number one, I'm a chatterbox, and my mom works as a librarian. My mom has a degree in library science, and my mom wanted to be a journalist. So my mom is a very prolific writer. And to have those things in tandem with each other, the fact that I like to talk a lot and tell a lot of stories, and then my mother is educated, I think that I just really, and my dad, he lectures a lot. I think I just really, really lucked out with the proper system to make sure that I was going to learn. I also had a very busy house full of, like I mentioned before, we were a full family with my grandmother living all in one house together, and me and my siblings all shared rooms. So like there were people around me constantly speaking, nobody signed. And at some point, and I hate to say it, but at some point it just becomes a matter of survival. I was either going to learn how to talk or I was just going to fail. Like there was no way around it. And I think in that situation, it's much like they say, if you want to learn Spanish, just go to Spain and you'll figure it out because you have to find out a way to survive. I think truly I lucked out in the fact that, number one, I had great resources around me. But number two, I was just left there to figure out how to speak, or else I wasn't going to have any options to speak. And I have recently come to realize this is probably why I feel a bit of language deprivation. Because we're now seeing what it is to not have access to those resources like ASL as a child. And without that tool, without a way for me to communicate, it has created some gaps because it's important to know I can communicate with you better than you're going to be able to communicate with me. And that's always how it's going to be. And that has created a lot of barriers between me and my ability to go out and do things and make relationships. Like that is a real barrier for me. And it's because there's a language deprivation here. I have the language to speak to you. You don't have the language to speak to me. You can try, we can go. It takes a lot of patience, but it is very much so like I am living in this whole other world while I'm able to just kind of flow undetected in everybody else's world. And to be honest, it can be a little lonely doing that. And so I just wanted to stick a little bit of that language deprivation thing there because when I kind of learned a little bit about that, I was like, that makes so much sense for the way that I feel, especially now that I'm older and I am still losing, I'm losing my hearing in the way that like a person as they get older, they lose their hearing, but like I have lost hearing even more so. So at one point, I might not even have the little bit of hearing I have now. And it does kind of upset me to know that I don't have the tools to communicate with who should be my community. And at some point, the people that are my community aren't going to have a way to communicate with me back. I feel like that sounds really complex. I hope that all makes sense. But as I mentioned before, deaf people aren't really all a monolith. So like there are some deaf people that talk, and a lot of it just has to come down to assimilation and just people are not very good with disabled people, okay? People are not very good at making adaptations. So sometimes it's just easier just to give in to the mainstream and give them what they need so you could just move on. So you could just do your thing. And so a lot of it just comes down to assimilation, why some deaf people talk. And just FYI, because I know people do it to me and I always want to say it to them, but I don't ever want to seem rude. I think I'm just going to give the general PSA and sounding rude. It's very rude of other people. It's very rude to comment on people's ability to speak, period. Like, it just is. It's rude to say that to people that can hear. It's rude to say it to people who can't hear. It's rude to say, we've talked about this before as a society. Like, it's rude to tell Black people they speak really well because, like, what are you saying there, right? It's rude to do that to deaf people too. You speak really well. Like it's rude. And then me being both, it's a very complicated feeling I have about that phrase because it's rude. It's just absolutely rude. You should not comment on people's speech abilities because first and foremost, when you comment on my speech specifically, I think it's important to note that you are only getting blurbs of what I'm saying. You don't know that at this point, I have tried to record this video about 5 different times because I could not get my mouth to say certain words. So I've had to go back through my outline that I have here and just see if I can find a different way to phrase different points because I can't say it. And like, when you comment on my speech, you're not getting the real profile of my speech. And I say it a lot, but I speak cursive all the time. Like, there are times when I say things and they just don't come out right. And I try. And that's a lot of the reasons why I put captions on things to make sure that if it doesn't come out the way that it's supposed to, at least you can see what it's supposed to say. And for people that aren't online like me, it's just generally rude to say that. So maybe just don't say that to people. You can think it, whatever you think is fine. 2 people, you should not be rude. 2 people, you should not say, oh, you speak really well for a ... Whatever you want to put in there, don't say it. It's just rude. Okay? It's just rude. So, how can you better accommodate the deaf or the hard of hearing people in your lives? If we ever get a chance to meet, how can you better accommodate me so that we can have a very pleasant meeting? I have a little list here of things. If we are online, and I talk about this all the time, and I talk about my little mini protest I'm like contemplating doing of just unfollowing everybody who does not use them, use your captions. Use them. Use your captions all the time. Every time you post something that has audio in it that you want people to hear, use the caption feature. I have created little tutorials on my social media on how to insert captions. Use the caption tool on your stories, use them in your posts, use them because it's not just for deaf people. I mean, although if you want to call me your bestie and then you don't want to use captions, you a fake. But it's also for people that just don't like to use the sound. A lot of these apps are very loud and they're very noisy and they just don't stop being noisy. So like, I personally just don't ever have the sound on ever on any of my apps. I just never turn them on. And it's nice to know that without my sound being on, I can still kind of follow along of what's happening. And other people, whenever I get DMs about my caption, most of the time it's not from deaf people. It's from like literally like mothers who have sleeping children around them who just want to scroll and can't get up. So they scroll and they know that whenever they see my name pop up, they're still going to be able to be involved in my content while their child is sleeping there. Or if you're at work, maybe you want to be able to scroll in the toilet and like, you just don't want people to know your business. Captions help for that. Like, captions aren't just for accessibility tools in general, aren't just for me and disabled people. They're for everyone. They make everybody's lives a lot better. So use your captions on everything. I even use them here, okay? So use them on everything. And if you don't know what here is, I mean, on my YouTube video, I have my captions. I put them up on my video. And I usually do them pretty big so that people can read them. So yeah, that's if you ever want to know what my videos look like. They are transcribed. And usually my captions are color coordinated to match my outfit or something. So, make them fun. The other thing you can do is look at the person that you're talking to. There was an instant I was helping somebody in the kitchen and they were calling my name and I had no idea. They needed to get into the trash can, had no idea. And till somebody was like, hey, you have to like look at her if you want her to know what you're saying. So then she had to tap on my shoulder and then I turned and looked at her and then I knew it was she was saying. But I read lips. That is how I communicate or gather information from other people is I read lips, I read body language. That is how I do that. And so I'm very glad that this mic is now hands-free because as a person, I'm very expressive. I am very big because even if I don't know ASL, expression is a lot of communication. When people started wearing masks, it was amazing how many people who aren't deaf suddenly realize their inability to understand things because so much of understanding language is reading body language and reading facial expressions, right? And so that's a phenomenon that a lot of people just took for granted, but the deaf community relies on expression, and I rely on your lips flapping, but I also rely on that body expression. And so whenever you have your deaf or hard of hearing friend, just make sure you are in their eye line and their peripheral. It just helps, you know. The other thing you can do is when you're in like a group setting, number one, try to be somewhere that's not super noisy, but also try to talk one at a time. I know that it can be hard because sometimes people get excited, sometimes people get argumentative or whatever and want to hop on somebody else's words, but you know, talking one at a time is quite nice. I like it when people kind of take their turns. Not saying you got to raise your hand or anything, but talking one at a time so that I can follow them and then I can follow you and then I can follow this person. And, you know, just that's also why whenever I sit at a table, I prefer first off sitting at a table as opposed to sitting like in a group setting at a bar because I want to be able to be central when I'm sitting. I want to be able to see everybody's faces. So I do prefer table sitting as opposed to like sitting at like a bar if I'm going to be in a group type setting. The other thing is, and I've made a video about this being one of my pet peeves, is avoid shouting. Do not shout unless you know how to project. And there is a difference. So like right now I am just talking, but if I talk like this and I give it just a little bit more power behind it, then I know how to project. And projecting is just a little bit different than shouting. Shouting just blows everything out. I don't even know what these waves look like right now because they probably look horrendous because I am just shouting. And there's just a difference between how all of those things vibrate and how all of those things, because if you watch that footage again, if you're once again watching this on YouTube, you will see when I project, my mouth the words I'm making don't necessarily change shape, and my words don't actually sound that much different. But if I'm shouting and just screaming, my mouth formation changes, which means that it's not going to be as easy for me to read the word, but also the words just kind of change shape. And so it's not going to be as easy for me to pick up what sounds familiar. Because a lot of trying to hear when you are deaf is trying to make sense of familiar sounds. And so, because like I said, you can hear the shape of a sound, you just can't hear all of the details, right? So just avoid shouting. And I feel like that was a lot of information once again, but I hope that you can follow that. And then the last thing really is patience is key. And also understanding that there are just things that your deaf friend, me, are not going to hear. And unless we specifically ask you for it, it's not your job to translate or to fill us in. You know, I'm thinking of a very specific scene from The L Word where Bet was dating Jody, who was played by an actual deaf woman. What's her name? Marlee Matlin. And they have a dinner party of some sort, I think to introduce Jody it was, and Bet takes it upon herself to start signing for Jody so that Jody didn't miss anything. And Jody kept telling her, like, stop, it's fine. If I want to know, I'll ask. It's okay. I'll miss things. And Bet got really, really emotional and upset because she's trying so hard to include Jody, but she forgot that Jody has lived her whole life like that. And I think a lot of people forget with deafness is like, I understand in the grander scheme of things that my deafness is considered a disability by a lot of people, but I don't feel that way. I feel whole and complete partially because I was born this way. I didn't lose my hearing later on in life. So it's not like this is all I know, quite frankly. This is all I know. So I know and expect to miss things because that's just my experience. And I am okay with it until I'm not. And when I'm not, I've also learned to say, hey, slow down. I do not know what the heck you're saying right now, and I would like to know what you're saying. So please, what was that again? And a lot of hearing people take it upon themselves to become that voice and to try, and it comes from a good place. I understand it comes from a good place, but we don't need translators unless we need translators, unless we specifically ask for translators or for somebody to come in and be that for us. And it's hard. It's hard because we all naturally have a little bit of a savior complex. We all want to come in and be a good person and know that we have helped make the experience for other people good, but we don't need saving. We don't need saving because I guarantee you most of the people in your life that were born this way at least know how to communicate to some degree that they need help. And a lot of that is just you need to have patience and you need to just be understanding that it's just life. It just happens. You miss things. Whoop. It's not the end of things in most cases, all right? In most cases, it's not the end of things if we miss something, especially in like friend conversation. I don't need to know every detail of Becky's cheating scandal, all right? I just don't need to know all of it. I will pick in the parts that I want to know. I will read those lips. I will probably know more of those details than other people because I'll also be reading the body language. I will know some drama if I want to know. I don't need your help, okay? I just don't. But I hope that this video or this podcast gives you just a good amount of information. I was very nervous making this video, and I don't know why. I think because this feels very informational and in a weird way. It just feels very formal, and I keep bumping my chin off this mic because I'm so used to moving it now with my hand, and I don't know. It just felt I felt very nervous, but I hope that this was a good, informative episode for you, and please, now that I'm on Spotify and Apple, can you please leave a rating for me so that I can get boosted in their algorithm or whatever it is? This is on YouTube. Please give me a thumbs up because I would like to be able to monetize this stuff. I would like to be able to do more with it. I would like to have a little bit of encouragement so maybe I know that I'm doing the right thing here. And I don't know. Like I say all the time and probably in the beginning of this episode is this just feels good. It feels right. I just have to get used to doing it and get used to talking. So yeah. Until next time, I absolutely love and adore you, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen and to learn because, like I said, this episode had a lot of information in it, and I hope that you did learn something, and I love you, and I hope you have a great day, and I can't believe I got cut off as I was saying goodbye, but goodbye.